That looks so cool in slow motion. I have nice technique. All the years of work have paid off. Let me see what the people have to say. Guys, joking aside, it doesn't bother me at all when I see these comments about my technique, and let me tell you why. So about 3 years ago, when I started this intuitive tennis journey on social media, I was posting on YouTube, I was also posting on Instagram, and early on Instagram I used to do swing path tracing. I don't do this anymore. I would basically trace the swing path of professional players' strokes, and I used some of the greatest players of all time, Grand Slam champions such as Maria Sharapova, Simona Halep. On the men's side, I used McEnroe, Becker, Ivanisevic. And this is where I realized that I shouldn't take any offense to negative comments about my technique online. If you would have seen the amounts of negative comments towards those players that I was posting on Instagram, you wouldn't believe it. For example, someone like Jeannie Bouchard was absolutely getting destroyed on her techniques. So was Sharapova. I'll never forget when I posted swing path tracing of Bernard Tomic. There was hundreds of comments bashing Tomic's technique as amateur, and what they were saying was even worse than that. I'm not going to get into details. But at that moment I realized that if those elite level tennis players that we all know by name, these are some of the best players in the world, are getting bashed because of their technique, I shouldn't take any offense if I get criticized for mine. So the negative comments really don't bother me that much. I know my worth as a tennis player. I've played in front of crowds when I played in the Bundesliga. I've played prize money tournaments that I won and played in front of crowds. Throughout my playing career, I have received nothing but compliments. And the only criticism I ever received about the way I play was once I started going on social media. So I understand what social media is all about. It's part of the deal. So the comments don't really bother me that much. But there's actually a little bit of truth to the comments, because yes, my technique is unorthodox, or if you want to call it, ugly. It's not that aesthetically pleasing to look at. But guys, there's nobody in the world that understands my technique better than myself. I have studied my own game, and it was the basis for starting my methodology, which is called intuitive tennis. I have studied my own strokes and compared them to the greatest player in the history of the game. I also compared them to players who are at the high level generally, and I have all the fundamentals that you need in order to be able to compete at the high level. So there is in essence nothing wrong with the strokes, but yes, they do look unorthodox, and in today's video I'm going to explain to you why. So let's start off with my feel. My volleys, my drop shots, my lobs, my slices. This is something that I was horrendous at as a junior. Like many other juniors, I didn't possess good feel, so I didn't even attempt these shots. I never came to the net, and generally my feel was not the greatest. I always had the ability to hit the ball very hard. When it came to feel, I wasn't very good at that part of tennis. However, when I came to college and I started training with the great Mel Purcell, I played a ton of doubles. Mel forced me to come to the net more, and all of a sudden my net game improved tremendously. And then when I started teaching, my net game became even better, because I was doing so many volleys each day as a coach that I ended up developing not only good volleys, but great feel as well. All right, the next shot we're going to talk about is my serve. So this is my best shot by far. My serve used to be even better. As I'm getting older, I'm going to be 44 very soon. My athletic abilities are declining, and I'm becoming a little bit less flexible on the serve. So my serve has gotten worse over the years. But when we're talking about playing at the high level, my serve can actually hold up at a level that's even higher than that. I have no problem being able to hold serve against really good players. Now, how do I know that? Because I was able to play against some really highly ranked players. For example, I played Andre Pavel at a prize money tournament in Germany on carpet. Yes, it's a fast surface, but I was able to hold serve comfortably. And this guy was in the top 20 of the ATP rankings, and I only got broken once. I lost 7-6, 6-4. So that goes to show me that my serve, or my service game overall, is at a very high level. All right, on to the next shot, which is my two-handed backhand. No, I don't have a one-handed backhand, but I do play with a one-handed backhand when I'm teaching lessons. So some of you guys might be confused. I actually have a two-handed backhand, and my two-handed backhand was one of my better shots. It was after the serve, my next best shot. It is very consistent. I rarely miss it. I can go cross court, I can go down the line. Technically, it's very sound, and I don't see any problems when it comes to my two-handed backhand, even when we're talking about optics. I think it looks like the backhands that you see on tour today. All right, now we get to the shot that you've been waiting for, which is my forehand. Everyone on social media is bashing me on my forehand. They're calling me a 4-0. They're calling me a 4-5. They're insulting me very badly. They're telling me that everything that can possibly be wrong is wrong on my forehand. They're even saying that I'm playing with an unbelievable extreme grip that they've never seen before. So everything that you can do wrong on the forehand, I'm doing wrong. And in today's video, I'm going to explain to you, number one, that there's absolutely nothing fundamentally wrong with my forehand. And number two, I'm going to explain to you why it looks unorthodox. All right, let's start off with the grip. So I don't have an extreme grip at all. I play with a semi-Western forehand grip. Now it does look a little bit weird when you see it in slow motion. It looks like as if I had an extreme grip, but it's not. It's a semi-Western grip. Now the reason why it looks weird, because it's happening in conjunction with the bent arm, and it's severely bent on my forehand. So that's why it kind of looks like it's an extreme grip, but in reality, it's a very common grip across all levels, which happens to be a semi-Western grip. All right, guys, now it's about to get weird because we're going to talk about how I take my racket back. And I have something called a high loop. What is a high loop? It's when the racket goes above the level of the head before it starts dropping down. Now, while this is an unorthodox take back, it's by no means a fundamentally wrong take back, because one of the greatest forehands in the history of the game also had a high loop, and that is Fernando Gonzalez. Look him up on YouTube. He's retired. He doesn't play anymore. He had an unbelievably huge forehand, and he also had a high loop where the racket goes above the head before it starts to drop. All right, on to the next phase on my forehand, which is the continuation of my takeback, where my racket goes fairly far back. It goes to about right here. Again, this is not something that's fundamentally wrong. There are even players in the top 100 today that have this type of takeback. Yes, most commonly, the modern forehand, the takeback is occurring a little bit more on the hitting side of the body, but by no means is it wrong to have the racket go a little bit further back. And now as my racket continues to drop, I get to about this place and my racket lags just like any other player. So you will see the tip of my racket going more towards the outside. This is the characteristic of a lag forehand. So all you guys that are saying that I have no lag on my forehand, that is absolutely wrong. Every high-level forehand has a lag. It is absolutely impossible to hit a fundamentally sound forehand without the wrist lagging behind. This is an intuitive element of the forehand which happens on its own. At the high level, the racket will actually not just lag this way, but actually whip backwards from the acceleration. That is exactly what takes place on my forehand. And the racket face is slightly closed as I begin my forward phase, and as I begin to approach the ball, now I make contact with my elbow close to the body. And this is what a lot of people are confused about. They're saying, Nick, you have a WTA forehand, how can you make contact like that? You are horrible at tennis because of this. But what happens in reality is that the vast majority of professional players, both female and male, plays the forehand with a bent arm. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with playing the forehand with a bent arm structure. Now shortly after contact, the tip of my racket will most of the time end up going through the ball before the racket goes across my shoulder in this way. Yes, there's going to be some occasions where I put a little bit more spin on the ball, where the tip of my racket is going to be more towards the outside as I finish my forehand in this way. Interestingly, I will sometimes catch my racket on the finish like this, and other times not. So the reason why my forehand looks this way is based on my genetics. When I was a junior, I was naturally very weak and very slow. I've trained the hardest I could possibly train to maximize my potential as an athlete, and I actually became quite a good athlete. But genetically, naturally, I was never strong or fast. Therefore, when we're talking about the high loop, this happened naturally. Nobody taught me this. This is something that happened on its own. And think about it logically. Why did it happen? Because it gave me a little bit more power. If I would have taken my racket back at a lower level, I would have gotten as much swing momentum as I did with the high loop. Now, for the exact same reason, my racket also has a tendency to go a little bit further back, simply because it gives me more swing momentum and more power. I don't get as much power if I happen to drop my racket more on the hitting side of the body. And as we go into the contact, we see the same tendency. I hit the ball very close to my body with a bent arm. I do have a little bit of space in between my elbow and my torso, so it's not a WTA contact, okay? It's still more of an ATP characteristic. There's players even in the top 100 today that have the same arm structure as I do, so this is absolutely nothing wrong with this type of arm structure. But naturally, the reason why I make contact closer to the body, because most players, when they make contact closer to the body, they feel more strength. This is the reason why pretty much all WTA players make contact very close to the body, meaning that their elbow is almost touching their torso as they're striking the ball. So up to the point of contact, everything's fine on my forehand, but here's where some of the problems start, and this is the reason why my forehand is not at the very elite level. It's definitely not even at the top 100 level of the ATP players that you see today. There are some weaknesses in my forehand, and again, they are based on my genetics. So if you see the video where I was training with my dad, where I was, I believe, 11 years old, you can see that I was hitting the forehand like this. My wrist was coming through after the contact. My arm was simply so weak that it couldn't withstand the acceleration of the stroke, and my wrist would give in. My dad noticed this and tried to correct it by keeping a more stable wrist throughout the finish. So naturally, with the wrist bending shortly after contact, something needed to be done, or I would have injured myself really badly. And I did in fact have a lot of wrist problems in my junior days, simply because my wrist was so weak it had to be stabilized. So I did a lot of work on my fitness, stabilizing the forearm. I was doing a lot of work to be able to control not only the contact but what happens shortly after contact, because again, I wasn't doing this thing on purpose. This was just naturally happening because again, genetically I was quite frankly not suited for tennis, and the acceleration of the forehand would simply take my wrist for a ride shortly after contact. So when you're seeing my forehand, yes, it does look stiff for a reason, because I'm putting a lot of control in this area of the forehand. Now, this is not something that I'm doing consciously, because I did all the work in my junior days and it has stabilized more and more over the years. So it's not as long and fluid as the players you see on TV. It is a little bit more rigid and stiff as I'm finishing my stroke after the moment of contact. Now, why do I say that my forehand is not at the level of the ATP Top 100? Because it's a flat topspin forehand, what you mostly see on the WTA Tour. Yes, there are some ATP players that have this forehand, but it's less than a handful of players. The vast majority of ATP players have a more heavy topspin forehand where the tip of the racket stays more towards the outside as the racket is going across. I don't do that. I will have the tip of the racket most of the time come through the ball as I'm finishing across the body. So you're asking yourself, Nick, are you doing this consciously? Not at all. My forehand is more flat, again, because of my genetics. When I hit my forehand at full speed, I don't have any control over what the racket is doing shortly after contact. This is naturally what is happening to my forehand when I try to give the maximum amount of power, because I'm naturally not a gifted athlete, not very strong. In order to give me a little bit more pace, my racket tip ends up coming through the ball instead of going over the ball in this way. This is just naturally what's happening. It is also the reason why the vast majority of WTA forehands hit their forehands in the exact same way. So to all the people that are giving me forehand advice and giving me tips, your advice is useless, because my forehand is fundamentally sound. All the fundamentals are there. I have proper timing, I have proper torso rotation, I make proper contact with my dominant shoulder in front on 95% of my forehands, and I'm able to play the ball with high consistency. That means I can get many forehands in a row, and I also have the ability to hit winners at will. So there's fundamentally nothing wrong with my forehand. So is my forehand as good as Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer? Absolutely not. It's far from it. Is it as good as the guys you see on TV that are in the top 100? It's not even as good as that. It is lacking the fundamental part that most of those players have in common, which is heavy topspin. So what happens when I hit the ball hard, if I was tested at that elite level, I will eventually miss my forehand before they would, because my forehand is more flat. When the ball is more flat, the control is sacrificed because of it. So for that reason, my forehand is not quite at that highest level. So somebody once asked me, hey Nick, are there any guys on tour that have ugly technique like you do? And the answer is yes. There are guys on tour that have ugly technique just like I do. I'm going to give you a few examples. I'm going to actually name them by name. Why not? So obviously you saw my video about Medvedev. We don't have to talk about that. If you want to know in great detail what I think about Medvedev's technique, check out my video that I posted a few weeks back. Other players with ugly technique are Karlovic, maybe Isner, even though I do think he's got a beautiful game, and of course Opelka. Now what do all these guys have in common? They're all tall and they're all lanky, and I happen to be tall and lanky as well. So most of the time when players are tall, I'm 6'5", you're going to give up on some agility and coordination. And I want to just add that those players that I just mentioned are way more agile and way better players than I am. But I'm just generally speaking of tall guys, and not all. There are some tall guys who are incredibly agile, like Del Potro, for example. But generally speaking, you will find that tall guys are a little bit less agile, less coordinated, and they're going to look more awkward on the court as a result of it. Now let's finish up this video with the logical question that you guys are going to ask, and that is, Nick, can't you improve your strokes and make them look pretty? Absolutely not. I have hit 1 million of balls at least. It's probably been 1 billion of balls. I have no idea. I've been someone who's trained like a maniac. I used to train 3 times a day. I have definitely maximized my potential. If you saw me playing tennis between the age of 10 and 12, I was not at a very good level. It was only through my incredibly hard work I was able to get better and better, and ended up having a very solid tennis career. I never ended up playing futures, but I had a very successful college career, and I played at an extremely high level when I played professionally in Germany. So I definitely maximized my potential. In fact, my technique now looks a lot better than it did when I played in college. I've become an all-around player just because I had more practice. So thank God YouTube wasn't around back in my college days.